Divorce me. My wife said those words like a dare. Like a challenge she was sure I would not accept. She had seen me threaten to leave before. She had watched me come back every single time. She knew I had invested too much to walk away. She knew I was afraid of losing everything I had built. She was right about all of that. But she was wrong when she thought I would never reach my breaking point. My name is Peter, and I want to tell you about the 8 years I spent building a life for people who never saw me as family. I spent too long ignoring what was right in front of me, and when I saw things for what they were, I couldn't unsee them. I met Dorothy when she was working as a receptionist at a dental office, and I came in for a root canal. She was beautiful and charming. After knowing each other for a while, she mentioned during our conversation that she was a single mother, and the way she said it made me want to protect her. She told me her ex-husband had been emotionally unavailable, that he had checked out of the marriage long before they divorced, that she had spent years feeling alone even while married. I believed every word because I had no reason not to. Her daughter Betty was 7 when I first met her, a cute kid with big brown eyes and a shy smile. The first time we were introduced, I remember thinking that I wanted to be the kind of man who could make her feel safe. I grew up without a father myself, so I understood what it meant to have that absence in your life. I told myself that if things worked out with Dorothy, I would be the father Betty deserved. I would be present in ways my own father never was. Dorothy and I dated for about a year before I proposed. During that year, everything seemed perfect. Betty warmed up to me slowly, and by the time I asked Dorothy to marry me, the little girl was much more comfortable with me. Dorothy cried when I proposed. She told me she never thought she would find someone who would accept her and her daughter as a package deal. She said I was different from other men, that I was kind, patient, and good. I believed I was doing what was right by loving her and her daughter. We got married in a small ceremony with about 50 guests. The first set of problems started small. Every blended family goes through an adjustment period, right? I believed that patience and consistency would eventually pay off. Looking back now, I can see how wrong I was. But at the time, I had no idea what I was walking into. About 3 months after the wedding, I noticed that Betty was staying up way too late on school nights, watching television or playing games on her mother's tablet. In the mornings, I would see her dragging herself to the breakfast table. Her teacher had already sent home a note saying that Betty seemed tired in class and was having trouble focusing. Her grades, which had been decent at the start of the school year, were starting to slip. I figured this was something we needed to address as a family. One evening at dinner, I brought it up and said that we should consider setting a bedtime for Betty, something like 8:30 on school nights. That would give her enough sleep to be alert and focused the next day. It was a simple suggestion that Dorothy would appreciate, as it would help her pay attention to her daughter's well-being. I thought we would have a quick discussion and come to an agreement like 2 adults raising a child together. Dorothy's response caught me off guard. She put down her fork and looked at me with an expression like she was sizing me up, deciding how to handle me. Then she said she would handle Betty's sleep schedule. She said I should let her take the lead on parenting decisions until Betty was more comfortable with me. I sat there for a moment and couldn't make sense of her response. Part of me wanted to push back. Betty was struggling in school, and the solution seemed obvious. But another part of me understood where Dorothy was coming from. Betty had only known me for about a year and a half, including the time Dorothy and I dated before the wedding. That's not very long for a child to adjust to a new authority figure in her life. I didn't want to come in like some dictator, laying down laws and demanding obedience. I wanted Betty to see me as someone she could trust, not someone she had to fear. So I backed off. I told Dorothy that I understood and that I would follow her lead. I decided to focus on being the fun guy instead of the rule enforcer. I was building a relationship based on trust and affection, not discipline. I figured the discipline part would come later, once Betty was comfortable enough with me to accept it. The problem was that it never came. Dorothy kept moving the goalpost, and I kept chasing it without realizing that I was never meant to catch it. About 6 months after that dinner conversation, we went out to eat at a casual restaurant near our house. It was a Saturday evening, and the place was busy with families and couples enjoying their weekend. Our waiter was a young guy, probably a college student working his way through school. He was polite and attentive, doing his job the way he was supposed to. When he came to take our order, Betty was distracted by something on her phone. Dorothy had given her the phone to keep her occupied while we waited. The waiter stood there patiently, pen ready, waiting for Betty to tell him what she wanted. After a few seconds, he gently said, "And for you, young lady?" Betty didn't look up. She just waved her hand at him and said, "Wait, I'm busy." I felt my face get hot. I looked at Dorothy, expecting her to correct Betty. She didn't. She just smiled apologetically at the waiter, like this was normal behavior. So I stepped in. I kept my voice gentle, but I was firm. I said, "Betty, we don't speak to people that way. Put the phone down and tell the nice man what you'd like to eat." I thought I was teaching her basic manners. Any reasonable parent would have done the same thing. Dorothy cut me off before I could say anything else. She turned to Betty and said, "Sweetie, take your time." Then she shot me a look. It was quick, but I caught it. That look said I had crossed a line, and we would be discussing this later. The rest of the dinner was awkward. Betty sulked and barely touched her food. Dorothy was cold and distant with me, giving one-word answers to my attempts at conversation. I felt like I had done something terribly wrong, even though all I had done was ask a child to be polite to a stranger. That night, after Betty went to bed, Dorothy confronted me in our bedroom. She told me I had embarrassed her in public by correcting her daughter in front of the waiter. She said I had made a scene and humiliated her daughter. I was confused. I asked her what scene she was talking about. All I had done was tell Betty to put down her phone and speak respectfully. That's basic parenting. That's what any adult should do when a child is being rude. Dorothy shook her head like I didn't understand anything. Then she said something that would echo in my mind for years afterward. She said, "You're not her real dad, Peter. You have to earn the right to discipline her." I stood there, trying to make sense of what she was telling me. I asked her how long it would take to earn that right. I asked her what I needed to do, what milestones I needed to reach, and what tests I needed to pass. She didn't have an answer. She just said that these things take time and that I needed to be patient. What I didn't realize then was that I would never earn that right. Money was always at the center of our arrangement, even if I didn't see it that way at the time. I thought I was building a family and investing in a future with the woman I loved and the daughter I was trying to make my own. The difference in our incomes was significant because I got paid more, but I didn't think much of it. Plenty of marriages have one partner who earns more than the other. What mattered to me was that we were building something together. We had a conversation early in our marriage about how we would handle finances. Dorothy said she wanted to keep working part-time so she could be available for Betty after school. Childcare was expensive, and having a parent available for pickups, homework help, doctor's appointments, and extracurricular activities was the wise choice. I agreed. It made sense on paper. Why pay a stranger to do what Dorothy could do herself? But here's what actually happened. Dorothy's part-time income went into her personal bank account. That money was hers and hers alone. She used it for her clothes, her hair appointments, her manicures, her lunches and dinners with friends, and her weekend shopping trips. She never contributed a single dollar to our household expenses. Not the mortgage. Not the utilities. Not the groceries. Not Betty's needs. Nothing. My income paid for everything else, including her daughter's school fees, her dance lessons, her piano lessons, which she quit after 3 months, her summer camp, and more. I never once complained about this arrangement because I thought that's what husbands and fathers did. They provided for their families so that the people they loved could have comfortable lives. I had grown up watching my mother struggle as a single parent, never having enough money for anything, always worried about bills. I told myself I would never let my family experience that kind of stress. So I worked hard, earned a good living, and handed over my paycheck without question. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't building a family. I was funding one. Another man was supposed to contribute, but he was nowhere to be found. Dorothy's ex-husband was supposed to pay child support. According to their divorce agreement, he owed $400 per month for Betty's care. That's $4,800 a year. In the 8 years I was married to Dorothy, James should have paid $38,400 in child support. I doubt he spent even a quarter of that. James's payments were sporadic at best. He would send $200 one month, then nothing for 3 months, then maybe $300, then nothing again for 2 months. He always had an excuse. Work was slow. His car broke down. He had unexpected medical expenses. His rent went up. Times were tough. Something always came up. Dorothy never pushed him. She never threatened to take him to court. She never hired a lawyer to go after the money he owed. She never even seemed angry about it. When I asked her why she let him get away with not paying, she gave me this sad, understanding look and said that James had a complicated relationship with money. She said he wasn't good at managing his finances and that pressuring him would only make things worse. She said it was easier just to let it go than to fight about it. Meanwhile, I was paying for everything his daughter needed. I was doing everything a father is supposed to do, and I was paying for the privilege. And James got to be the fun dad. He would show up on occasional weekends, once a month or once every 6 weeks, with a new toy or a special outing planned. He would take Betty to the movies or the arcade, buy her ice cream and candy, let her stay up late, and then drop her back home so I could deal with the sugar crash and the disrupted sleep schedule. What really bothered me more than I wanted to admit was the credit James received for doing almost nothing. When James sent money, even if it was just $200, after 3 months of silence, Dorothy would treat it like a special occasion. She would take Betty shopping and tell her that Daddy sent her something special. Betty would come home with a new outfit or a new toy, and she would be so happy that her daddy had thought of her. Dorothy would smile and talk about how James was trying his best and how sweet it was of him to send something for his little girl. When I paid for something for Betty, there was no announcement. Dorothy didn't take Betty aside and tell her that Peter had bought this for her because he loved her. There was no thank you card, no special recognition, no acknowledgement at all. My contributions were expected and invisible. They were just part of the background, like the electricity or the running water. Nobody thanks the power company for keeping the lights on. Nobody thanked me for keeping a family afloat. Although I consoled myself by saying I wasn't doing any of this for recognition or praise, it still hurt. I was actually doing it because I loved Betty and wanted her to have a good life, because it was the right thing to do. But looking back now, I think I was lying to myself. I just couldn't admit it to myself at the time. I couldn't face the truth of what my marriage had become, because facing that truth would have meant facing the possibility that I had made a terrible mistake. And I wasn't ready for that yet. By the time Betty turned 11, things had changed. She was a preteen with an attitude which is normal enough, but her attitude toward me was different from her attitude toward everyone else. She was sweet toward her mother. With me, she was cold, dismissive, and sometimes openly hostile. I remember the first time she told me I wasn't her real dad. We were arguing about screen time, and she looked me in the eyes and said, "You can't tell me what to do. You're not my real dad." Then she walked away, and I stood there feeling powerless. Even after telling her mother, Dorothy, about it later and expecting her to say something, to correct her daughter, to back me up even a little bit, Dorothy shrugged and told me that Betty was at a difficult age and that I shouldn't take it personally. Then she went back to what she was doing as if nothing had happened. That was the first time I seriously considered divorce. I searched for divorce attorneys in our area. I read about the process, the costs, and the division of assets. I thought about what my life would look like if I left. Quieter, lonelier maybe, but also free from this constant feeling of being an outsider in my own home. I didn't call any of the attorneys. I told myself that things would get better, that Betty was just going through a phase, that Dorothy would eventually see what was happening and step in. I convinced myself that I had invested too much to walk away now. 4 years of marriage, plus the year of dating. The house we had bought together. The college fund I had started for Betty. The life I had built. Looking back, I recognize what that was. Sunk cost fallacy. I stayed not because things were good, but because I had already given so much that leaving felt like admitting failure. I would make this mistake several more times before I finally learned my lesson. The years between Betty turning 11 and 15 were a slow erosion. It happened in small moments that accumulated like drops of water wearing away stone. There's the time I came home from a 12-hour workday to find that Dorothy had invited her ex over for dinner. She hadn't told me he was coming. I walked into my own house to see my wife, her ex-husband, and their daughter sitting at my dining table eating. Dorothy introduced me as if I were a guest. "Oh, James, you remember Peter." James barely acknowledged me. I didn't eat that night as I excused myself to my office. Dorothy came in later and told me I had been rude by leaving early. I asked her why she hadn't warned me that James was coming. She said she didn't think it was a big deal. That was the second time I considered divorce. I got as far as meeting with an attorney for a consultation. He explained the process, told me what to expect regarding asset division, and asked if I was sure this was what I wanted. I told him I would think about it. Then I went home, and Dorothy greeted me at the door with a hug and an apology. She said she knew things had been hard between us lately. She said she loved me, and that she would adjust, and also talk to Betty about being more respectful. She held my hand and looked at me with those eyes that had made me fall for her all those years ago. I wanted to believe her. So I called the attorney the next day and told him I wouldn't be needing his services. The talk with Betty either never happened or had no effect. Within 2 weeks, things were back to normal, and by normal, I mean terrible. The cycle would repeat several times over the next few years. Things would get bad enough that I would get cold and start planning my exit. Dorothy would sense that I was pulling away. She would turn on the charm just long enough to reel me back in, and then we would return to the status quo. The dynamic shifted somewhere around year 6 of our marriage. Betty was 14 by then, and she had perfected the art of treating me like garbage. But what changed was that Dorothy stopped pretending to be neutral. She started joining in. At this point, the only thing that kept me from leaving was shame. I didn't want to admit to my friends, my family, or myself that I had failed at marriage. I twisted my suffering into a virtue because facing the truth was too painful. But the more I thought about it, the worse things got. During early December, I was looking forward to the holidays. Christmas had always been my favorite time of the year, and despite everything, I still had this naive hope that we could have a lovely family celebration together. I had already bought gifts for Dorothy and Betty, made reservations at a nice restaurant for Christmas Eve, and planned to cook a big meal on Christmas Day. Dorothy sat me down in the living room about 2 weeks before Christmas. She had this look on her face as she told me that she and Betty had decided to spend Christmas with James. She said Betty needed time with her real father and that they would be leaving on Christmas Eve and coming back the day after Christmas. She delivered this information without considering how it might affect me. I asked her what I was supposed to do. Was I supposed to spend Christmas alone in our house while my wife and stepdaughter celebrated with her ex-husband? Dorothy looked at me with something close to contempt. She said that if I didn't like it, I could divorce her. She actually said those words as if it were a challenge she was confident I wouldn't accept. She had seen me threaten to leave before, she had watched me back down every time, and she was sure I would back down again. In her mind, I was too invested, too afraid, too weak to actually follow through. Something changed in me at that moment. I don't know how to describe it except to say that something finally broke. Not my heart, because that had been breaking slowly for years. I looked at Dorothy, and for the first time in years, as a woman who had never loved me. I saw a woman who had used me for financial security while giving her emotional loyalty to someone else. I saw a woman who had let her daughter treat me like garbage because she didn't see me as worth defending. I said, "Okay, I'll take your advice. I want a divorce." The confusion on her face was visible because she hadn't expected that. I got up from the couch and walked to my office. I pulled up the contact information for the divorce attorney I had consulted years earlier and emailed him to ask if he was available to meet. The weeks that followed my decision to divorce Dorothy were difficult, but I had braced myself for that. What I did not expect was the complete absence of accountability from either of them. Not once during the entire divorce process did Dorothy or Betty apologize for anything. Not once did either of them express regret for the way they had treated me over the years. Not once did they acknowledge that their behavior might have played any role in the collapse of our marriage. Instead, they acted as if I were the villain. Dorothy launched a campaign to make me look like the bad guy. She told anyone who cares to listen that I was heartless and selfish. She painted herself as the victim and me as the monster who had destroyed our family. What she conveniently left out of every conversation was the Christmas ultimatum that had started all of this. In her version of events, I had simply woken up one day and decided to abandon my family for no reason at all. Betty was even worse. She was 16 by then, old enough to understand what was happening and old enough to take a side. She chose her mother's side without hesitation. The first time we spoke after I announced my intention to divorce, she told me that I was dead to her. She said I had never been her dad and that she was glad I was leaving. She said she had always known I was not really part of the family and that now everyone else would know it too. Her words were sharp and precise, designed to cause maximum damage. She had learned well from her mother how to hurt me with words. She called me a monster and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. That was the last real conversation we ever had. When the divorce proceedings began, Dorothy's attorney came after me with everything they had. They made allegations intended to destroy my reputation and tilt the case in Dorothy's favor. Financial abuse was their first claim. They argued that I had controlled the family finances manipulatively, restricting Dorothy's access to money and using my income as a tool of power. The accusation was absurd to anyone who knew the truth. Dorothy had her own bank account that I never touched. She spent her part-time income however she wanted, while I paid for everything else. I never told her what she could or couldn't buy with her money. I never restricted her spending in any way. But her attorney twisted the situation to make it seem like I had kept her trapped and dependent on me. Their second claim was emotional neglect. They argued that I had been distant and uninvolved as a parent to Betty. They painted a picture of a man who lived in the same house as his stepdaughter, but never engaged with her, never participated in her life, never showed any interest in her well-being. This accusation was also completely false, but it was harder to disprove with documents alone. How do you prove that you were present? How do you prove that you cared? Their third implication was the most serious and the most dishonest. They hinted that I had been verbally abusive without making a formal accusation. They used phrases such as hostile home environment and demeaning language, without providing any specifics or evidence. They were testing the waters to see if they could make the accusation stick without having to prove anything. If I had not been prepared and had not kept records over the years, those implications might have caused real damage to my case and my reputation. But I was prepared. Over the years, without even realizing I was building a defense, I had kept records of everything. I had bank statements going back years, showing that I had paid for roughly 90% of all household expenses. The paper trail was clear and undeniable. I had receipts for every major purchase I had made for Betty, including her $4,000 braces, her dance lessons that cost hundreds of dollars every month, her private tutoring sessions, her summer camps, her school supplies, her clothes, and her electronics. I had emails and text messages showing that I was actively involved in her education and her activities, asking about homework, grades, and upcoming events. I had report cards with my comments written in the margins. I had documentation from her school listing me as the primary emergency contact for all 8 years of my marriage. Every time Dorothy had put my name down as the person to call when Betty was sick or in trouble, she had created evidence that I was involved in her daughter's life. When my attorney presented this evidence to the court, Dorothy's case fell apart like a house of cards in a strong wind. Her attorney had made allegations, but they had no proof to support any of them. They had accusations, but no documentation. They had painted me as a neglectful, controlling, abusive stepfather, but the paper trail told a completely different story. The bank records showed a man who had sacrificed financially for years to support a family that was not even his by blood. The judge saw through Dorothy's strategy quickly. I could tell from the way she looked at Dorothy during the proceedings that she had seen this kind of thing before. She had watched other people try to use the court system to punish spouses who had done nothing wrong. She was not impressed by Dorothy's performance, and her attorney's tactics did not fool her. In the end, the assets were divided according to state law. There was nothing I could do about that. I lost more than I would have liked. Dorothy received a portion of my retirement savings. Some other investments we had made during the marriage were split down the middle. All told, Dorothy walked away with hundreds of thousands of dollars in assets that I had earned through my own labor, while she worked part-time and spent her income on herself. It hurt to watch years of hard work get divided up and handed over to someone who had contributed so little to building what we had. It felt unjust. It felt like I was being punished for being the responsible one. But I understood that this was how the law worked, and that this was the price of freedom. I could either stay in a miserable marriage to protect my assets, or I could pay the financial cost and get my life back. I chose to pay. There was no alimony, which was a relief. Dorothy was capable of working full-time, and the judge determined that she did not need ongoing financial support from me. She had a job, skills, and a substantial settlement. There was no reason for me to keep paying her indefinitely just because we had been married. The judge made that clear, and Dorothy's attorney did not push back. There was also no ongoing obligation to Betty, and this was the one silver lining of all those years of being reminded that I was not her real father. Because I had never legally adopted Betty, I had no legal obligation to support her after the marriage ended. James was still her father, legally and financially. That responsibility belonged to him now, not to me. The divorce was finalized about 16 months after that Christmas conversation. Yes, I had lost money. Yes, I had lost time that I would never get back. Yes, I had lost the future I had once imagined for myself, the happy family, the growing old together, the stability I thought I was building. But I had also lost the constant tension. I had lost the anxiety that greeted me every morning and followed me to bed every night. The financial cost was real, and it would take me years to recover. But I would recover. I was not sure I would have survived another decade of living the way I had been living. I moved into an apartment across town about a week after the divorce was finalized. The peace took some getting used to. I had grown so accustomed to tension that its absence felt strange, almost uncomfortable at first. I had to relearn how to relax in my own home. I had to teach myself that I was safe now, and gradually, I learned to enjoy the quiet. A few months after the divorce, I started seeing a therapist. I knew I needed help understanding what had happened to me and making sure it never happened again. My therapist helped me see patterns I had been blind to for years. He explained that Dorothy had used a technique called intermittent reinforcement, which involves alternating between cruelty and occasional kindness to keep another person emotionally hooked. She would be sweet for a few days, making me think that the good times were coming back. Then, once I was recommitted to the marriage, she would return to her usual behavior. I threw myself into my career with the energy I had not had in years. Without the constant stress at home draining my mental and emotional resources, I found that I had more to give at work. I took on challenging projects that I would have avoided before, and I stayed late when necessary without worrying about what mood Dorothy would be in when I got home. I volunteered for assignments that stretched my abilities and showcased my skills. I started rebuilding the financial security I had lost in the divorce settlement. The hole in my savings was deep, but I was filling it in month by month, paycheck by paycheck. Was I happy? Yes, genuinely pleased in a way I had forgotten was possible. Not every moment of every day, because life does not work that way for anyone. But as a general state of being, as a baseline, I was happier than I had been in years. While I was rebuilding my life piece by piece, Dorothy and Betty were watching theirs fall apart. I did not know the details at first because I had cut off all contact and told mutual acquaintances that I did not want updates about them. But information has a way of filtering through, especially in the age of social media, where everyone is connected to everyone else by a few degrees. I heard things here and there from people who did not realize I wanted to be kept in the dark. Dorothy had walked away from the divorce with hundreds of thousands of dollars. For most people, that kind of money would be a significant cushion. It would be enough to rent a decent apartment for years, to establish a stable life, to plan for the future with some breathing room. A responsible person would have used that money to build a foundation, bridge the gap while getting a better job, or invest in education or training that would lead to a higher income. Dorothy and Betty did not do any of those things. They treated the settlement like they had won the lottery. From what I heard, Dorothy did not increase her work hours after the divorce. She stayed at her part-time job, bringing in at most $1,500 a month. That was nowhere near enough to cover rent, utilities, food, transportation, and all the other expenses of daily life, especially not in the area where we lived. But Dorothy did not adjust their lifestyle to match their new reality. They kept living like I was still there to pay for everything. James, Betty's biological father, did not step up. If anything, he became even less reliable after the divorce. James continued his pattern of sporadic, insufficient payments, always with excuses about why he could not pay the full amount. Within a year, the money was gone. All of it burned through in 12 months of reckless spending and wishful thinking. The first message from them came about 13 months after the divorce was finalized. I had changed my phone number specifically so Dorothy could not contact me, but she found another way. She tracked down my email address through my company's website, which listed contact information for employees in my department. One morning, I opened my inbox and saw an email from an address I did not recognize. The subject line read, "For Betty's sake." I knew what it was before I opened it. I debated whether to just delete it without reading. Part of me was curious. Part of me wanted to know what she would say after everything that had happened. Against my better judgment, I clicked on the message. The email was carefully crafted to avoid taking any responsibility while still asking for money. Dorothy started by explaining that things had been difficult since the divorce. She said that Betty was struggling emotionally and academically, that the upheaval had affected her grades and her mental health. She said they were facing financial hardship that threatened their stability, using vague language that did not specify precisely how they had blown through $200,000 in a single year. She acknowledged, in the most general terms possible, that things had ended badly between us. She did not say what things. She did not say why they had ended badly. She did not acknowledge any role she had played. She just noted that the ending had been bad, as if it were a natural disaster that had happened to both of us rather than a situation she had created. Then came the ask. She wondered if I could help with that month's rent. Just this once, she said, for the sake of the child I had raised. She reminded me that I had been part of Betty's life for 8 years, as if I needed reminding. She was counting on the guilt to do the work for her. I read the email, looking for an apology or an honest acknowledgement that what they had done to me was wrong, some sign of genuine remorse rather than strategic regret. But there was nothing like that anywhere in the message. There was just a hand outstretched for money, exactly like it had always been throughout our entire marriage. The dynamic had not changed at all. Dorothy still saw me as a source of funds, not as a person. She still expected me to solve her problems without offering anything meaningful in return. I typed back, telling her, "I'm sure Betty's real father can help with the rent. Please do not contact me again. This email address will be blocked." Then I blocked her email address and moved on with my day. A few weeks later, a message appeared in my LinkedIn inbox from a profile I did not recognize. The profile picture was a stock image, and the name was not one I knew. But when I opened the message, I realized immediately who had sent it. It was Betty. She had created a fake LinkedIn account specifically to get around my blocks and reach me. Her message was longer than Dorothy's and more calculated. She started by acknowledging that she had not always been nice to me. She said she had been a kid and did not understand what she was doing. She painted herself as an innocent child who had made mistakes without realizing the consequences. Then she pivoted to nostalgia. She reminded me that I had raised her. She asked me if I remembered specific moments we had shared. She was trying to appeal to my emotions, to the memories of the brief period when our relationship had been good. Then came the real purpose of the message. She told me they were about to be evicted. They had received a final notice and had 2 weeks to come up with the money, or they would be out on the street. She asked if I could please help, just this once, for old time's sake. I noticed what she was doing. She was using the same manipulation techniques her mother had taught her. She was invoking shared memories to create an emotional connection. She was presenting their crisis as an emergency that only I could solve. But I also noticed what was missing. There was no genuine apology. I did not respond. I reported the fake profile to LinkedIn and blocked it. Then I went about my day. Over the following months, the messages kept coming. They found new ways to reach me, no matter how many times I blocked them. Dorothy created new email addresses using different names and different email services. Betty made more fake social media profiles. They messaged my friends, asking them to pass along their pleas, putting my friends in the uncomfortable position of being intermediaries. They sent physical letters to my workplace, addressed to me personally, which meant I had to explain the situation to my office manager and ask that any mail from them be discarded without being given to me. The tone of the messages evolved as they grew more desperate. The early messages were friendly, trying to appeal to the connection we had once shared. They used warm language and invoked happy memories. When those messages failed to get a response, the tone shifted. The messages became guilt-focused, designed to make me feel responsible for their suffering. They accused me of abandoning a child, of being heartless, of letting them suffer because of my pride. Dorothy wrote that she had always known I was cold inside and that the divorce had revealed my true character. Betty wrote that she cried about me every night and that I was the reason she was failing in school. When guilt did not work, some of the messages turned angry. Dorothy said I would regret cutting them off when I was old and alone with no one to take care of me. Betty said she hoped I never found happiness and that I deserved to be miserable. They threatened to tell everyone what kind of person I really was, to expose me as the monster they believed me to be. This threat was almost funny in a dark way. They had already tried to destroy my reputation during the divorce, making accusations they could not support, and no one had believed them. They had already told everyone who would listen that I was the villain, and it had not worked. But they kept making the threat as if it had power over me. I did not respond to any of it. I blocked every new email address and every new social media profile. I told my friends to ignore any messages from Dorothy or Betty and not to pass anything along to me under any circumstances. Eventually, the messages would have to stop. They would run out of ways to reach me, give up, or find someone else to support them. Until then, I would keep blocking and keep ignoring. I do not know what happened to Dorothy and Betty after the messages finally stopped. At some point, they stopped trying to reach me. Maybe they found someone else to support them, another man willing to play the role I had played. Maybe James finally stepped up, though, based on everything I knew about him, I seriously doubted it. They might learn to take care of themselves, got better jobs, and made more intelligent choices. I do not know, and I have made peace with not knowing. Their lives are no longer my concern. I do not regret the divorce. If anything, I regret not doing it sooner. I regret the years I spent hoping things would change, even as the evidence kept showing me they would not. I regret every time I backed down from leaving because Dorothy turned on the charm and made me think things would get better. But regret only has value if you learn something from it. Regret without learning is just suffering for no purpose. And I have learned plenty from my years with Dorothy and from the aftermath of leaving. I have learned to recognize when people are using me, to pay attention to actions rather than words, and to notice when someone only values me for what I can provide. If you are reading this and any of it sounds familiar, if you see yourself in the man I used to be, I want you to know something. It does not get better on its own. People who are willing to mistreat you rarely decide on their own to start treating you well. The change you are hoping for seldom comes. And the investment you have already made, the years and the money and the emotion you have poured into the relationship, is not a good reason to keep investing more of yourself into something that is making you miserable. You deserve to be treated with respect by the people you love. You deserve to feel valued in your own home. You deserve to be seen as a person, not just a provider. If the people in your life cannot give you those basic things, they do not deserve your love. That is the lesson I learned through the years of pain and a divorce that cost me almost everything I had built. I hope you understand it faster than I did. I hope you recognize the signs sooner. I hope you find the courage to walk away before you lose as much as I lost. And if you have already walked away, if you are already on the other side of that difficult decision, I hope you know that it gets better. The guilt fades. The peace grows. And one day, you will look back and realize that leaving was the best thing you ever did for yourself.